hemlock trees that they want to cut down. So the company builds this town down there at Lakeland along the Schrader Creek, but you know, there's nothing there now but just some chimneys. 1,000 people live there. There was a high school, churches, there's a company store, a huge lumber mill in the foreground, there's a kindling wood mill and 2 or 3 other kinds of wood products, plants, and then in the background where the smoke is rising up is the wood chemical factory, which is the picture on the right-hand side. And it only lasted about 15 years for the lumber mill, and then the wood chemical company is the last of the 5 plants to close down. Actually, it burnt down in 1933, and by then very few people were living there because the company decided to cut another tract of hemlock, and so most of the houses and everything was disassembled, moved, and then reassembled. But the CCC camp, the Civilian Conservation Corps camp, moved into there in 1933 and was there until 1941. And of course, there's nothing down there now but a few hunting camps. And all right, this is called our parlor. It used to be a lot neater, but in July of 1997, the Valley Railroad Museum in Sayre disbanded and gave us all their railroad artifacts. And so we had to find a place to put them, and so we brought them into this room, and then everything that was in this room we had to put somewhere else. So that's what's up on the wall is for the Lehigh Valley Railroad. And what you have to appreciate for Bradford County is that the town of Sayre 100 years ago, 110 years ago, was nothing but a cow pasture. And then the railroad decided to build their headquarters up there, and in 6 years, Sayre was the largest town in Bradford County. And it's because of the Lehigh Valley Railroad. At one time, the maintenance shops up in Sayre were the 2nd largest in the United States of America. They built locomotives. They built passenger cars and cabooses, and then they repaired. Now over on the wall, you have a picture of Asa Packer, and that's where the Robert Packer Hospital comes from, up in Sayre. All right? And next to him is a picture of Stephen Foster, and he has nothing to do with the railroad. Yeah, you guys were across the Susquehanna, and then the canal boats went up the one side, and then the mule would walk across the railroad bridge pulling the canal boat, and then it would go over to the other side of the river, and then on up to Athens. The canal was very active for about 15 years, and then it went bankrupt, and then the Lehigh Valley Railroad bought the right-of-way and the track bed, or the rate. 100 years ago in July of 1898, Frank Nathan Moore from the Orwell area gathered up a company of volunteers from Bradford County, about 120 guys, and they went off to Georgia for training to participate in the Spanish-American War. The war ended before they deployed overseas, but the names of the soldiers are on the right-hand side, and they were gone for about 3 months, and then they came back to Bradford County, and they had a parade over in East Towanda, a mustering out parade. But it was pretty exciting in July of 1898 because they all came to Towanda and they mustered in. They marched over to East Towanda and they caught the railroad train in East Towanda, and in about a day later they were down in Georgia for basic training. And you can read all about that in our November issue of The Settler, which is our quarterly magazine of history and biography. Now, I don't know if you guys are looking for other topics for videos and stuff, but living right there in Canton is Paul Percival, who's about 84 years old. And he has, in this map, yeah, that's where you were this morning, so that's kind of an interesting historic map, which was found in an old chest of drawers. It was sent up to Canada to be unfolded and mounted because it was in such poor shape. Okay, what else we got here? Behind you on the right, one of the last elk harvested in western Pennsylvania. You can see the size of the rack. There used to be a lot of elk in Bradford County, and along with deer and bear and turkeys and all those other kinds of things. That's what the Indians hunted, and then they fished. There were a lot of fish in the river, shad that used to migrate up. Now you got to be very careful of these display cases. You can't lean on them, can't touch them. The glass is very fragile. These are old style cases here. Most everything in here are artifacts found in Bradford between the Towanda-Monroe Road and Towanda Creek. And these were gathered up by Captain Cotting and his family and so forth. There's over 1,000 arrowheads of various sizes, bird points up to the larger spear points in the middle, and then you have hammer stones and pipes in the two corners on the bottom. Now, the brown ones are made out of jasper, and that's not something from Bradford County, so people who are familiar with Indian artifacts said they must have been trading for those because that's more in southern Pennsylvania. We have a lot of pottery shards that are right here. And the best time to find Indian artifacts is in the spring after a farmer has plowed the fields and it has rained the night before. You can still go out and find lots of Indian artifacts in Bradford County, especially where at the mouth of creeks and where you might suspect the Indian village ends. And then over here we have fishing net stones. They caught a lot of fish out of the river and they used the stones to weight down the nets. Now behind you on the wall are a series of maps and so forth of Colonel Hartley's expedition against the Indians and then the Sullivan expedition in 1779. Bradford County is really settled by, and what we have on this board, maintained by some local people dealing with the Scouts, is the activity in Bradford County. And in Leroy, 1924, and Troy, 1924 for Girl Scouting, Towanda in 25, but the first in Towanda was in 1917. So what we have on this side are all manner of clippings and pictures from the early days of scouting. And what's really neat is that I get people who come in here and they'll point to a picture and they'll say, well, there's a picture of me in 1950. Or there was a picture of me at some scouting and camping activity up at the SCI in Towanda or in other places in Bradford County. We also have information on scouts in Troy, Mr. Pomeroy drove to Washington, D.C. one night so he could be standing in line in order to form the first post number 1. So this is the troop charter for the, I would think, the first Boy Scout troop in the area. And we have a list of all the names of the original scouts. And this is the first troop. So it's Troy Boy Scout troop number 1. And then we have all the paperwork and the memorabilia to support that. We have all kinds of badges and everything. And then we've got a display on Eagle Scouts here somewhere. And we even have somebody, young Pomeroy from the Troy area and others. Behind you is a Susquehanna River here in Towanda. They used to start on the top of Bridge Street Hill and they'd go across in the wintertime on toboggans and get about halfway across.
I got a brain.
Of the Troy High School Drum and Bugle Corps. And we have quite an old postcard collection of the various towns and areas. And I thought I had some Canton cards and so forth.
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Moved on.
He came to Bradford County. He was born in Wayne County, Bethany in Wayne County, grew up in Susquehanna County, went down to Wilkes-Barre and read law, and then when he was 20 years old, he comes to Towanda, and within 6 weeks, he's a partner in a law firm. And then when he's a young man, he was elected as he was in the Democratic Party, and he went down to Washington, D.C., 1846. He was actually down there about 6 years altogether, 3 terms. And he writes the Wilmot Proviso. And that has to do with the extension of slavery into the territories gotten from Mexico from the Mexican War. Passed by the House of Representatives several times, but never passed by the Senate. He comes back to Towanda in 1850 and becomes the local judge of the court here. And then in the early part of the Civil War goes back down to Washington, D.C. as a senator, and then he's later a judge of the Customs Court in Philadelphia. And then they tore it down. Kind of a scandal because a contractor only paid $200 to tear this down and sell the materials. Okay, so Bums was carried by somebody from Bradford County. And the regiment from Bradford County was the 141st Regiment, and on the wall, the two frames filled with 15 pictures each that you're looking right at there are veterans of the 141st Regiment. So mostly everything in here has to do with the Civil War, the American Civil War. There is some World War I items. For example, the wood propeller in the corner. That's off an airplane. Back in the old days, they made propellers out of, and you can see that you'd have to be in good shape to carry that around for a long time. And we got some paper money, Confederate money. Here's a small flag here that was taken off a dead soldier. Photography just started. I mean, cameras were put together a shipload of trading goods that they were going to take down to Texas in the 1840s and sell and make their fortune. So on the voyage down, the ship sinks, and he was able to make it off and swim to an island, and a couple years later makes his way back to Bradford County. So he has a very, very interesting story to tell there. On the right is Samuel Mckean from Burlington Township, who was quite a famous local official, and he was down at Harrisburg in the legislature and then a major general of militia. So quite a few people from Bradford County during that time period went off and were at a tavern, and that's the sign that hung out in front of that tavern. The room behind you is the DAR room, Daughters of the American Revolution, the George Clymer chapter, and that's what this room's all about. Now, in the one display cabinet in the corner, we have some things from the Wayne cut glass factory. More things were made locally because you didn't get in your car and drive 50 miles. Mine coal there for quite a while. Most of the deep mining coal, they quit that in 1891 when the Erie Railroads. Yeah, slide the drawer shut, please. Okay, guys, you're in my house here, and I'd appreciate a little. In the attic, it's quite old, probably from the 1820s or 30s. And at first we thought it was David and Sally Ann Newell from Susquehanna. But we found the painting of David and Sally Ann, so we're kind of at a loss who these two people might be. So if anybody recognizes them, please let me know. All right, behind is a different kind of wood. And every log is from a different township. And on the wall is a list of the wood and the donor and where it came from. And so on every log is a plaque saying that information. So they put this up 2 years after the museum started in 1903. They put it up in the other building. And then when they moved in 1974, they had to take it away. I'm told when women cut their hair, they saved it. And they were very careful not to save their hair. Here in the museum, of course, are a lot of old things from the history and heritage of Bradford County. And that's why we're here. We're here to gather up all this kind of good stuff. I guarantee that that's probably the only ledger volumes. And there's about 50,000 of them on file. And before 1885, they didn't keep that kind of information. So that makes it much harder to do your family history. They didn't keep information on births and deaths and marriages, not until the late 1800s. So for you guys that are interested in family history, or if you get interested in family history, that's a good thing to know. It makes it a little more difficult to find out information. Question?
Is this up to date?
Well, we only have from 1885 to 1892 here, but at the courthouse, their information's up to date. So you can go down there and if you give them a name or somebody, you can see that kind of information. What we have, we're very fortunate, is we have 3 paper. So for people doing research, it's a very valuable asset. So we've been able to get these over the years. Okay, well, we'll go in the back. This is all from 1924. Yeah, be real careful. These papers are very, very fragile. And don't even flip the pages because they'll tear. All right? So just leave them open where they're open. And that's why we've microfilmed them, is because they're so fragile. This is the Towanda business item from 1871. And then you can see we were looking at sewing machines upstairs. This is a kind of a sewing machine from that time period. And over here is the Bradford Star from 1900. And so we've got 200 of these kind of volumes. And our problem is that they were in such poor condition, nobody could use them because they would literally crumble right in your hands. So that's why we sent them off to be microfilmed. And it was like 77,000 pages altogether, so it took quite a while. And this is a regular library, like a research library. Green Free Library. Historical Society, and we're looking at some baby carriages that were donated a long time ago. And this is the first baby carriage from that was donated. And the interesting thing about that one is we even have a picture of the baby that was in it. And you see modern day baby carriages, even people out jogging, and they're pushing a baby along with them as they go along. But the idea is an old one, because here's a baby carriage for twins. So we got a lot of fabrics here and quilts and so forth. Behind you is a picture of John Meyer, and it's hard to see because there's a lot of glare on there. But he's one of the founders of Myersburg, which is a town, a small village between Wysocks and Rome. Over here is a piano, one of 14 pianos constructed in Towanda by the M.C. Wells Company in the 1870s. And somebody wanted to give us another one, but we didn't have any room for it, so we had to turn it down, and I just feel so bad about that because space is at a premium here. And so they even made pianos here in Towanda. Okay, we got a lot of other things on spinning wheels and so forth. We've got, if you can go into the next room, they would have put a dog or a sheep on this, and there would have been a butter churn. Have you been to the Farm Museum yet up in Troy?
Yeah, I have.
Now that's a great spot there. They have a lot of good exhibits and a lot of good things. But they did everything with animal power in those days. They would even have larger versions of this where a horse would walk up the treadmill and then farm work would be done, just the power of moving up and down on the treadmill. So there's a lot of other kinds of agricultural implements in here, but you can't see them because we've got the room filled up with our books that we sell. Okay? Here's a railroad crossing stop from Bradford County. Remember I was telling you that the Valley Railroad Museum gave us their things. We've got a lot of that. An old-time typewriter. See, you guys are spoiled because, you know, computers and everything. And back in the old days, when I was in high school, before we had computers, and you had to type everything on a portable typewriter. And if you made a mistake, you had to type it all over again. So computers are kind of a real good technological tool. Yeah. All right, behind you on these display things are woodworking tools used by older generations. Again, this is before the age of plastics and a lot of metallurgy. So many things were made out of wood. And they had, if you've ever read any of the books by Eric Sloan, who knows a lot about woodworking and the history of wood, and he's an artist and he illustrates his own books, but he has wonderful explanations of how to build a barn using a broad axe over there, and then how to put it together using wooden pegs and no nails, like the Amish would do. And in some of his books are illustrations of that, how they would go about building that barn and what kind of wood that you would use. So which is kind of interesting. Any questions?